So this is another impromptu episode of the If You Know, You Know podcast. And I'm frightful that this is just going to become me responding to guests on Joe Rogan's podcast. And maybe it's a sign that I just need to have guests on my podcast a lot more often. But at the moment, I really don't have that kind of power or infrastructure to do that. So for now, you're just going to have to listen to me ramble on by myself and talk about some of these things. I should also say that I'm doing this impromptu episode as opposed to the actual episode that I want to do, which is about Kanye's new album. Regardless, so I'm currently listening to the Joe Rogan podcast featuring Kevin Smith, filmmaker. I love Kevin Smith when he comes on the podcast. I think that the conversations that he has with Joe are so great and hilarious and funny. And this is a great time to listen to. And I would totally recommend that anyone who maybe doesn't listen to Joe Rogan, or if you haven't listened to that particular podcast yet, go ahead and go listen to it. It's just great. Anyways, as Joe does, he is voicing his opinions, always totally fine. However, I do sometimes have problems with his opinions because I feel like they're mildly uninformed or they're a bit too idealistic and they miss out on certain facets of an argument that maybe need to be considered before you make such an opinion. And one of those opinions that he's talking about right now is this idea that racism is going to be eradicated in our society within the near future, that in the next couple of decades, we're going to see racism be besmirched, to be, erased from the face of society. And I want to make it clear before I start on my little tangent here, by saying that I don't believe, I'm not disagreeing with him that racism cannot be eradicated or that it can be eradicated in our society. I totally believe that racism can be alleviated, mitigated, and eventually, eradicated from society completely. However, my point of contention with him is that the culture as it exists right now is helping to alleviate racism. It's helping to mitigate the forces of racism, or that it's helping to eradicate racism. Certainly, we have a lower tolerance for racism than probably any generation before us. However, I think that there are two ways of viewing this kind of erasing of racism from our society in this generation. In particular, I feel like there are people who, so I'll start with myself. So there are a lot of people who are going to be upset with me by saying this, but I really don't care. I consider myself to be mostly colorblind. I know that's a very triggering word. I know that's a word that people don't like to hear, but for the majority of my formative years and for the most of my life, I have never really considered race when I'm talking to someone or when I'm interacting with people. It's not something that I think about, I don't think about the fact that I'm a black person in America every single day of my life, all the time. I don't think about that. It's not part of my that aspect of me is not a huge part of my identity. And as a result, because I don't view it as a huge part of my identity, I don't view it as a huge part of everyone else's identity either. I have white friends, I have Hispanic friends. My boyfriend is Hispanic, but I don't, that's not at the front of my mind. That my friends are white, or my friends are Hispanic, or my friends are black, or my friends are Arab, or they're any of these sorts of things, Middle Eastern, Asian. I don't think about those sorts of things because it's just not a factor in my thing. If I was a employer, I would not think about race as the primary factor in whether or not I'm going to give someone a job. And I don't think that there are many employers that still do. But I guess the next level is that I'm not going to, I don't know. I just don't think about race. I don't view race as a part of people, as a real, or as like a fundamental feature of their character. Whereas I do think that there are a lot of people in my generation today who do view their race as a fundamental part of their character. Even though it's the very thing that they're apparently rallying against, it's apparently this paradigm, this idea that they're fighting so much against, yet they continue to glorify and they continue to radicalize themselves in this idea that I am a black person. That is my identity. My identity is I'm a black person. And every day of my life, I am a black person. That might be true, but it's just not a fundamental part of your character. I think that your ethnicity can be a fundamental part of your character. I think your nationality could even be a fundamental part of your character. As long as you're not being a nationalist. Nationalists believe that their nation is the most superior, but I don't think there's anything wrong with being proud of your nation or being proud of where you come from, but I think that falls into the category of ethnicity. So I don't think there's anything wrong with being proud of your heritage and your ethnicity, and that's one thing. But when your whole platform is built on the idea that you are, a black person, or that you are a white person, or that you are a Latina or Latino, or whatever. I think that it's superficial, and I think that it's not productive. I think that it does more to harm the progress of race relations in the nation than it does to mitigate it or to, eliminate it. Because when you begin to favor your race over other people, this is exactly what we fought for through the civil rights movement and into the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and even today, is this idea that we are not going to separate everyone out by their race. We are unified as a people, as human beings. We are unified. There is no reason to consider your race as, factor number one when you go out into the world. It's just, you do what you're going to do. You are, as an individual, you're three-dimensional. A two-dimensional character is a character that is completely defined by their superficial features, but people being three-dimensional, there are things within them that are more important and more prescient, and I think that you would want more people to know about than just your race. And I think that right now we overemphasize race to a great degree in terms of I think that racism can certainly be eliminated because of the fact that it is a superficial ideology and it is a superficial notion, that exists within people. And, but I think that there are other greater issues that you could probably accomplish and tackle that you could detach from the idea of race, and be able to fix the country and to be able to make it more peaceful for everyone else if you just detach it from race. I wouldn't have a problem with an organization like Black Lives Matter if their mantra wasn't Black Lives Matter. If their mantra was, we're going to go into our neighborhoods and we're going to figure out the problems in our neighborhoods because these are our neighborhoods, regardless of who's in the neighborhoods, I'd be a lot more on board with their mission. But their mission is, we are only here kind of for the Black lives. We are only here for the, what equality is not, it is pursuing justice for those who are treated unjustly. But I don't think that injustice is racially bound. Even today, I think that once upon a time, many years before I was born in 1999, I think that justice and injustice were both tied very stringently to race. I think that there are certain situations where, obviously black people are treated unjustly, but I think there are just as many situations where Hispanics and white people and Asians and Native Americans and any other, race or category that you want to put people under are treated unjustly. It's not bound up in race. I don't think so. I think that when you look at the system as a whole, racism or race is not the cause of all these problems. I think that there maybe is even a notion floating around that if we get rid of racism, suddenly all of our problems will go away. Or that if you dismantle race, suddenly, everything else becomes easier. But I don't think that's the truth. I think that it's a complex system. And certainly it's nice to focus on the one thing, but make sure that you're looking at how that one thing fits into all things and making sure that, if you do eliminate this one thing, will it really alleviate all the problems that you think it's going to alleviate? And I don't think that's true. But to talk about like the low tolerance culture of racism and to talk about people having a low tolerance for racism, I think that I don't mean to say that condescendingly, and I'm sorry if I sound condescending when I say it, but, we also need to be careful about how we're defining racism, because, when we talk, when Candace Owens was on the Joe Rogan podcast recently, she talked about her first experience with, racism, how she came to become the person that she is today. I'm not going to call her a conservative. I'm not going to call her a Republican, because she has said herself on that podcast, and you can go listen to that podcast, and she said herself she is not a Republican. She leans right. She is a bit conservative, or she is conservative. She always feels like she had conservative beliefs. So I guess I can't call her a conservative, but she's not a Republican. She's an independent. She's a free thinker. And, there is nothing wrong with saying free thinker, and that gets into just what her situation was. She was called all sorts of horrible things as a young adult that formed her, experiences today. In particular, a couple of her, so-called friends, called her some names. She knew these people. They called her, the N-word. They called her just horrible things. They said things that were related to, Black history, that are totally disparaging, like, we're going to lynch your family, X, Y, and Z. And when it turned out that it was the people that she thought it was, one part of the gang of kids who apparently had disparaged her was a 14-year-old kid. And what she said is, this kid is now being labeled a racist for the rest of his life, and it's going to ruin his life. And I think that was a very telling moment, is that we have to be very careful about how we're defining racism, how we're defining what a racist is, and, what is racist. Because I completely agree with her, and I think this is my mentality, is that it is totally possible to say something that is racist, and it can be still wrong that it's racist, and you not be racist. Be a racist. You can say something that is related to race and something that is very disparaging to another race and still not be a racist. I think that to be a racist, that has to be your entire worldview. I think that it has to be, a fundamental part of your character, is that you believe yourself that you are superior to someone else because of the superficial quality of the color of your skin. I think that a racist is a white supremacist, or a black supremacist, or a Hispanic supremacist. Someone who believes that they have supremacy, power, influence over someone by merely the character of, or merely by the feature of their skin color. I think that's what a racist is. They don't care, or they care about other races as long as they are subordinate to them. I feel like that's just what a racist is, but I don't think that to say something that might be, considered, or to say something that is prejudiced, or to say something that is, wrong about someone based on their skin, I don't think that makes you a racist completely, I think that most people have at some point in their lives said something that is racist, or mildly racist. I think I don't know where it is, but I know there's like some show or like some, joke about being mildly racist. Everyone is mildly racist to one degree or another. And I mean, look at the basic fact of it. It's just because most people have a lack of exposure to different communities, which we should not condemn people for. This is one aspect of this culture and this generation that we do have, is that we are interested in educating people about different cultures. Do that. Don't be mad at them because of the fact that, maybe they just, they don't know. You also have to take into consideration that we are always people. We are people, If we don't know someone, we're going to say something disparaging about them that's probably going to have to do with some, exterior quality about them that has nothing to do with their character or the community at large. If you see someone from a particular group of people, if there's a clique of kids, in school or something like that, and you say something about them without ever having met any of them, you say something disparaging about them, and there are a lot of people who maybe are like them, or you meet an individual from that group and you say something negative about them, that maybe does not form your entire opinion about that group. It may diminish your opinion of that group just because you don't know them and the person that you encountered didn't do a good job of representing that group. But that doesn't mean that the entire group is what you're saying, and you're not implying that. What you're saying is that potentially wherever they come from, they are not, they're not representing well, or you just don't like the philosophy of that group. I mean, I think that's just human nature. If you look at history, if history is just the history of philosophies, it's the history of how people think of each other. the history of how people interact with each other based on their ideas. And I mean, when you have nothing else to go on, when all you have to go on is your initial sight of someone or one person's initial action, of course, you're going to, maybe make some presumptuous statement that's not true that could potentially change once you meet that person and you really begin to understand them as a person. But I think we need to be careful as a culture, as a society, as people, as a generation we need to be wary of just calling someone anything and then ruining their life forever because they said one thing. What if, unbinding it from race, what if you said something just totally negative, something so wrong about someone once upon a time? What if you said something that was wrong in hindsight, but everyone was totally outraged, and now it's on your permanent record forever? Now it's on your permanent record that you said X about Y, and now you can't get a job. Now everyone looks at you ashamedly. Now no one wants to be around you. Suddenly you're completely isolated. Suddenly you are the villain. For one statement that maybe you apologize for a statement that you potentially didn't mean the way that it seemed to have meant in that moment, for a statement, for words. That doesn't make any sense. And I think that's what the danger is in calling people, racist, rapists, calling them misogynists, calling them abusers, calling them X, Y, and Z, when maybe there's little to no evidence that they are what you just called them. You are doing exactly what you said that we shouldn't do, which is basing your entire opinion of those people on a superficial quality. I'll get off my high horse now. I just that's my response to it. Once again, I think that racism can totally be, eliminated in our society, but I don't think that the way to do that is to suppress it. I think that the only way to do it is to really dismantle it and to really face up to it, and not to condemn, but to, repent, reform, and to, just help people. Don't castigate them. Don't kick them out of the group just because of one thing that they may have said that they maybe didn't mean. Who has not said something out of anger that we don't regret later on? How many of us have said something to our parents in a fit of rage, or our parents to us in a fit of rage, that later on we just wish we hadn't said, and that we can be forgiven for? I feel like that's exactly how we should treat this topic, is that we need to forgive and learn and then forget about it. Well, not forget about it, but certainly forget the emotions that are attached to it. But remember that it happened, and think about how far we can come and how far we've come from that point of potential racism. So that's my statement on that. I might add more to this particular little impromptu thing later on, but for now, that's really all I have to say about the topic. Yes.